It's Jack Pinter. How you doing, mate?
Out of all the gin joints in all the world, Matthew, you ended up in this one.
Exactly. What are the chances? What are the chances that it's been a while? Have you kept well?
Pretty well throughout. Haven't had the virus yet, so still something to look forward to.
Yes, exactly. Well, Christmas is still there. We've got to keep something a surprise, haven't we?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. So it would be rude not to talk about the elephant in the room. Any aspects, any points of view that we could talk about today?
Well, I think as it's a new year, Matthew, I think we
Yeah.
ought to just reflect on the past one and think about going forward. And I guess my question to you and to everyone out there is, was 2020 the most remarkable year in our lives? I pose that as a question.
Exactly. It was a changer, wasn't it? By the way, before we go there, what should we go back there? Were there some other contenders for that? Were there some other moments people now living that could sort of count as a major change agent? And do they compare?
Well, I think we can obviously go back to something that at least is in our parents' lifetimes, and that's the Second
Yeah.
World War. And we'll talk about defining moments in a moment, but I think that is something that really was remarkable, a remarkable thing. And I guess more recently, if you lived in Eastern Europe, we could
Yeah.
look at 1989, the fall of the Iron Curtain, absolute revolution, complete change in people's lives and the way people's lives are organized. Again, a little bit more recently, just a little bit more than a decade ago, we had the global financial crisis,
Yeah. Yeah.
2008. I always tell this story of this friend of mine who was living in Kathmandu at the time, and he said that, people were watching things on the news and they're like, nothing's changed here. What's the big deal? This has not affected us at all. So I think there have been these things that have been pockets in different parts of
Yeah.
the world, but we
Yeah.
have a pandemic, or we have had a pandemic. We still have in 2020 introduced this word pandemic into our
Yeah.
common lexicon. And
Yeah.
also, I suppose it is something that has affected everyone in the world, that everyone will be aware of it. Even if you're in the bush somewhere, you're probably still going to feel the impact of what has happened this year.
So it's a global phenomena, although apparently we've got the Italian strain and the new Kent strain, but it's a global phenomena. Thank you, airlines. And so we have pandemic and so forth, but obviously different experiences. And just referencing back before we go on to that, things like 1989, if you were Polish, was an opening up of air travel and possibilities. So there was a
Mm.
divergence of possibility, whereas the World War II seemed to be. I mean, like my stepmother had the most fantastic war in the women's auxiliary, bloody blah. Driving lorries around and dancing to the ink spots and being flirted with by just about everybody. So there's the positive possibilities and the negative possibilities. So comparing that, what are our thoughts about this thing, this phenomena?
Well, I think it lacks glamour, doesn't it, Matthew? Let's just, like as you said, even World War II was an opening up.
Yeah,
For a lot of people, it changed what was going on,
yeah,
and there were a lot of new things that are going on. All those American servicemen that may have been
yeah.
flirting with your mother, who just previously weren't there. This kind of end of the world mentality, that we've seen captured in so many films. Like, who knows if we're going to be alive tomorrow? And I guess we have that a little bit, but I think it's been much more of a this has been much more of a closing down, much more of
Yeah,
a,
yeah.
yeah, not an event, and let's say an inner adventure more than an outer adventure.
Love it, love it, love it. Yes, and you and I seem to, I wouldn't say benefit. I mean, war is a peak in innovation and productivity. I felt that I've had to be more creative. I've had to be more productive. I've never chucked out more words. We've never had more views. So there's something that has happened there, and it's been in the sense of being of service to the community. So there is something positive, yes, but overall it's very much a net negative, isn't it?
Well, and I think for a lot of people who've lost their businesses, things that
Yeah,
they've worked their entire lives to build,
yeah,
people who've lost their jobs in industries that they thought,
yeah,
well, there'll always be a restaurant industry, there'll always be a hospitality industry. That's never going to go away. And, of course, we've seen all this horrible data about poverty and about
yeah,
homelessness.
yeah,
And the numbers, how they've skyrocketed, and how much some people
yeah.
have not, because of what they do, have not been able to thrive, or continue, or find a creative way forward in their industry or in their
Yeah.
chosen profession.
And if you take something like catering, it was always on the borderlines. Do you remember Jamie Oliver starting 15? And he
Mm,
deliberately said unemployed and homeless. Those 15 chefs were unemployed and homeless.
yeah.
So catering at the back end, the hot and sweaty end, was the transition point from hopeless to hopeful. And
Mm.
apparently, a lot of people who are going to were sleeping rough at Christmas time were from the catering industry. So that's been a tough part. But as you say, sort of optimism was about. Actually, just 1 second. We've got an unstable internet. So yeah, optimism was really about the confidence that something will be there tomorrow. And once you take that away, you change the psyche.
Yeah, and I suppose when you go back to World War II, fighting in a just war, what Studs Terkel called the good war,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
idea
yeah,
of a shared experience, fighting for right,
yeah.
fighting for good, and I guess what we've all done individually could be considered that kind of collective effort, but it's just it feels pretty drab.
No, I love your idea. It's ordinary, it's grey, it's dull. And what's victory?